It was a bright, sunny afternoon when Flight 324 took off from the bustling airport, headed for a peaceful journey to a faraway city. Passengers settled into their seats, buckled up, and listened as the flight attendants went over the usual safety instructions. The plane hummed softly as it climbed higher and higher into the sky, its wings cutting through the clouds, carrying the passengers smoothly through the air. The flight crew, led by the experienced Captain Thomas Graves, went about their usual routine, checking the equipment, making announcements, and ensuring everything was in order. They had flown this route countless times before. It was just another normal flight, or so they thought. Among the passengers was a young boy, no older than 10, sitting by the window with his mother. His name was Alex, and although he seemed fine at first, something wasn't quite right. The flight attendants went up and down the aisles, making sure everyone had their seatbelts fastened, offering drinks, and helping with whatever passengers needed. But when one of the attendants, Sarah, passed by the boy, she noticed something odd. Alex was staring out the window, his face pale, almost ghostly. His hands were clutching the armrests of his seat tightly, as though he was trying to hold on to something. His feet, tucked beneath the seat in front of him, were bare, which was unusual. Most people keep their shoes on during a flight, but what caught Sarah's attention the most were his feet. They were swollen, an odd shade of purple, and there seemed to be a strange redness around his toes. Sarah immediately felt a wave of concern. She hesitated for a moment, unsure of whether she should approach him. But then she saw the way Alex was shifting in his seat, squirming uncomfortably. His face contorted in pain, and Sarah could see that he was trying hard to hide it. The boy was obviously in distress. Taking a deep breath, Sarah approached Alex's seat. "Excuse me, young man," she said kindly, kneeling beside him. "Are you feeling okay?" Alex turned his head slowly toward her, his face flushed and sweaty. He tried to smile, but it looked forced. "I'm okay," he said quietly, though his voice sounded weak and shaky. Sarah didn't buy it. She had seen enough passengers to know when something wasn't quite right. She gently asked him to take off his shoes, and that's when the full extent of the problem became clear. His feet were not only swollen and purple but also cold to the touch. Alarm bells went off in Sarah's mind. This wasn't just a case of a boy feeling unwell from motion sickness or a long flight. Something was seriously wrong. She didn't want to panic, but she quickly walked over to the head flight attendant, a calm and experienced woman named Barbara. Sarah explained the situation, and Barbara's face grew serious. Barbara walked over to Alex's seat, kneeling down next to him. She examined his feet carefully, checking his skin color and the swelling. Alex winced as she gently touched his feet. Barbara could tell that the boy was in a lot of pain. Her heart sank. Something had to be done, and fast. The two flight attendants exchanged a look. They knew they couldn't just wait around to see if it got worse. It was time to notify the captain. Barbara grabbed the radio and spoke into it, her voice steady but urgent. "Captain Graves, we have a situation. There's a young boy on board who seems to be in serious distress. His feet are swollen and he's in a lot of pain. We need your advice on what to do." Captain Graves, who had been monitoring the flight from the cockpit, responded immediately. "Understood. I'll be right there." As Sarah stayed by Alex's side, offering him words of comfort, the flight crew knew that time was of the essence. Something wasn't right, and they needed to act quickly before it became an emergency. What was causing Alex's condition? And what could they do to help him before it was too late? The crew braced themselves for what might be coming next. They had no idea yet what they were dealing with, but they all understood that sometimes it's in these moments of uncertainty that their training and quick thinking would make all the difference. Captain Thomas Graves was already heading down the narrow aisle of the plane, his boots clicking softly against the floor as he made his way to where the boy was sitting. Sarah and Barbara stood by Alex's side, keeping him calm, but they couldn't hide the worry in their eyes. Alex was clearly in pain, and with every minute that passed, it seemed to get worse. His breathing had become shallow, and his face, which had once been pale, was now tinged with an unhealthy, deep red. Captain Graves crouched down beside Alex, his experienced eyes quickly taking in the situation. He could see the boy's feet, swollen and discolored, showing shades of purple and blue. His small toes were barely visible beneath the puffiness. The child had clearly been struggling for some time, but no one had noticed it until now. "Alex, can you tell me what happened?" Captain Graves asked, his voice calm but with a hint of concern. He wasn't used to seeing passengers in this kind of distress during a normal flight. Alex's voice was barely above a whisper. I don't know. My feet hurt so much." Captain Graves gently placed a hand on Alex's shoulder, trying to comfort him. He turned to Barbara, who nodded slightly, signaling that things were becoming more serious. They had seen enough to know this wasn't something that could be ignored. The situation was getting worse by the second, and Graves had to make a decision. "We need to get him medical help now," Barbara said quietly, her voice firm. Captain Graves didn't hesitate. He immediately radioed the control tower, his voice steady but urgent. "This is Captain Graves on Flight 324. We have a medical emergency on board. There's a young boy in serious distress. We need to make an emergency landing at the nearest airport. Over." The response came back quickly. "Roger, Flight 324. You are cleared for an emergency landing. Proceed to the nearest runway and report your location. Over." Graves exhaled slowly, relieved that the control tower had responded so quickly. He turned back to Barbara. "Keep him calm. We're going to land as soon as we can. I'll get us down safely." Barbara nodded, but her concern was clear in her eyes. She patted Alex's arm gently. "Alex, we're going to get you some help. You just need to breathe, okay? Everything's going to be all right." But Alex wasn't so sure. His eyes were wide with fear. He had never imagined something so serious could happen while he was on a plane. He tried to nod but winced as another wave of pain shot through his feet. He looked up at the flight attendants, his lips trembling. "I don't want to die." Hearing the boy's words hit Barbara hard, but she quickly pushed aside her own fear. She forced a smile, even though her heart was racing. "You're not going to die, Alex. We're going to help you. Just hang in there a little longer." The flight attendants did their best to keep Alex calm as Captain Graves focused on getting the plane safely to the ground. They had been flying at 30,000 feet, and now they had to quickly descend, while still ensuring the safety of all the other passengers on board. It was a delicate balance between speed and caution. As they began the descent, Captain Graves kept in constant communication with air traffic control, updating them on the plane's position and speed. His experienced hands worked the controls of the aircraft with precision, making sure they would land as quickly as possible without jeopardizing the safety of the passengers. Sarah stood near the back of the cabin, keeping an eye on the rest of the passengers. She was relieved to see that most of them seemed unaware of the emergency unfolding in the cabin, but there were a few nervous glances. She knew they couldn't afford to explain everything right now. Just focus on the boy and get him the help he needed. The plane tilted slightly as it turned towards the airport, the engines whirring in a steady rhythm. Every second felt like an eternity, but the crew kept working together, focused and determined to handle the crisis. They had been trained for situations like this, but the tension in the cabin was thick, and the fear in Alex's eyes was a stark reminder of what was at stake. As the plane began its final approach to the runway, Barbara squeezed Alex's hand gently. "Just a little bit longer, sweetheart. We're almost there." Alex nodded weakly, the pain still radiating through his legs. He could hear the engines roaring louder as the plane descended, and he held his breath, praying that everything would be okay. The crew's hearts were all beating a little faster as they prepared to land, knowing that this moment was critical. But they were ready. They were determined to do everything in their power to help the boy in his time of need. Barbara stood beside Alex's seat, her eyes never leaving him. She gently placed a cool hand on his forehead, "You're doing great, Alex. Just a little longer, okay?" she said softly, trying to keep his anxiety at bay. The boy nodded weakly, his face still pale, his breaths shallow. His feet were now a dark purple, and the swelling had spread higher up his legs. It was clear that something very serious was happening, and Barbara could only hope they would land in time to help him. "Sarah, stay with him," Barbara said. She turned to the other flight attendant who was standing nearby, watching the situation unfold. "I'll let the captain know we need medical help the moment we land. We're almost there." Sarah nodded and continued to hold Alex's hand, keeping him calm by speaking to him in a gentle, soothing voice. "You're going to be all right. We're all here for you." In the cockpit, Captain Graves kept his attention on the instruments. The plane's altitude was steadily dropping as the engines roared louder, signaling that they were close to the ground. He kept one hand on the throttle and the other on the control yoke, guiding the aircraft toward the runway with precision. He could feel his pulse quicken with each second, but he didn't allow himself to lose focus. He had landed many planes before, but this time felt different. The life of a child was at stake, and there was no room for error. The landing gear locked into place with a soft thud, and Graves steered the plane into its final approach. He carefully adjusted the speed, making sure they didn't land too hard. The runway below was coming closer and closer, and Graves could see the flashing lights from the emergency vehicles waiting on the tarmac. His heart raced as he brought the plane closer to the ground. Barbara took a deep breath and prepared herself for the next step. She needed to stay strong for Alex, but she was starting to feel the weight of the situation too. She could hear the plane's wheels touching the runway, and the familiar screech of the brakes filled the cabin. The plane jolted slightly as it came to a stop, but there was no time to waste. She quickly grabbed the intercom and called to the rest of the crew. "We've landed. Prepare for medical assistance as soon as we're off the plane," Barbara announced. Once the plane had come to a complete stop, the flight attendants opened the doors, and the emergency crew was already there, ready to assist. The paramedics rushed onto the plane, their equipment in hand. They were calm, but their expressions showed that they understood how urgent this situation was. One of them knelt beside Alex, immediately starting to check his vital signs. They gently moved him from his seat, making sure not to cause him any further discomfort. "Can you hear me, son?" one of the paramedics asked as he checked Alex's pulse. Alex nodded slowly, his eyes glassy. The paramedic quickly administered oxygen to help him breathe more easily. Barbara stepped back to give the medical team space to work. Her heart was still racing, but she felt a wave of relief wash over her as she watched them take over. She had done all she could, but now it was in the hands of the professionals. She turned to Sarah and gave her a small, reassuring smile. "It's over. He's in good hands now," Barbara said softly, though she couldn't shake the feeling that this could have turned out much worse. As the paramedics worked, they quickly realized that Alex had suffered a severe allergic reaction. His body had gone into shock from something he had eaten before the flight. The swelling in his feet was a sign of his body's severe response to the allergen. The paramedics gave Alex the necessary medication and continued to monitor him closely. Meanwhile, Captain Graves walked out of the cockpit to check on Alex. He could see that the boy was being carefully loaded onto a stretcher, and though his color was starting to return to normal, he was still very weak. The doctors and paramedics spoke in low tones, making sure that everything was being done to stabilize Alex. "He's going to be all right," one of the paramedics assured the captain. Graves nodded, his own heart finally starting to slow down. "Thank you," he said, feeling a deep sense of gratitude toward the medical team. It was a moment of relief, but the crew still had a job to do. Their passengers were still on board, and they needed to ensure they were safely taken care of as well. As the paramedics carried Alex off the plane and into an awaiting ambulance, the rest of the passengers remained unaware of the life-or-death situation that had just unfolded. The crew had done their job, and now Alex was on his way to the hospital, where he would get the care he needed. Barbara stood by the door, watching as the ambulance sped off, her breath finally slowing. She was exhausted, but she knew they had made the right decision to act quickly. They had saved a life today. As the ambulance sped off toward the nearby hospital, the crew of Flight 324 stood in the cold air, watching the flashing lights fade into the distance. The tension that had filled the plane only moments before was now slowly melting away. Captain Graves, though still on edge, was relieved. They had made the right call to land the plane when they did. Alex's life had been saved, and that was all that mattered. But even as the crew began to relax, their minds were still full of questions. What had caused the boy's severe allergic reaction? How had it happened so suddenly? They all knew it wasn't a simple case of food poisoning. This had been something much more dangerous. Captain Graves couldn't stop thinking about Alex. The boy had seemed so healthy when he boarded the plane. But just a few hours later, he was fighting for his life. Graves had seen his fair share of emergencies in his years of flying. But this was different. The speed at which the situation had escalated had shaken him more than he cared to admit. Once the medical team had left with Alex, Barbara, and Sarah returned to the plane. They had a job to finish. The passengers had no idea what had just happened, but the crew needed to make sure they were all safely taken care of before they could close the chapter on the eventful flight. The calmness in the air had returned, but the crew was still processing everything that had happened. Barbara took a deep breath, her heart still beating a little faster than usual. "I'm glad it worked out," she said quietly to Sarah, who had been right by Alex's side through it all. "I didn't think we'd make it in time." Sarah nodded, her face showing relief. "Neither did I. But we did. We did everything we could." Captain Graves entered the cabin and walked toward the crew. "We were lucky," he said, his voice firm. "We acted quickly, and that made all the difference. But now we need to figure out what happened. Why did his body react so strongly?" Barbara and Sarah exchanged a glance. They had already been discussing the possible causes. It didn't seem like something as simple as a bee sting or a mild allergy to food. The way Alex's feet had swollen so quickly and the color of his skin suggested something far more serious. "We'll have to wait for the hospital to give us a full report," Barbara said. "But I think it was a peanut allergy. The swelling and discoloration, especially around his feet, those are classic symptoms of a severe allergic reaction." Captain Graves nodded slowly. That seemed to make sense. He had heard of peanut allergies before, but he had never witnessed an emergency like this unfold so quickly. It was a reminder of just how fragile life could be and how important it was to stay alert at all times. "We'll need to file a report for the airline," Captain Graves added. "But I'll make sure to mention that we acted quickly and followed all necessary procedures. The boy got the help he needed, and that's what matters." Barbara and Sarah both agreed. They knew that the crew had done everything right. They had noticed the warning signs early, and they hadn't hesitated to take action. That was the key to saving Alex's life. "Do you think it was something he ate before the flight?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed with concern. "It's possible," Captain Graves replied. "But we'll need to wait for the doctors to confirm that. For now, we can only guess." As the crew wrapped up their duties, the tension from the flight began to fade. The passengers, who had no idea about the emergency that had just taken place, began to gather their belongings, preparing to disembark once the plane was cleared for departure. Captain Graves and the rest of the crew continued to discuss the situation, even as they prepared for the next phase of the flight. The crew's focus was on ensuring the safety and well-being of every passenger, just as they always did. But today, they all carried with them a new awareness. They had learned the importance of quick thinking, teamwork, and trusting their instincts. As the last passenger exited the plane, Captain Graves felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The flight had ended in an unexpected way, but it had ended well. They had saved a life, and that was all that mattered. And yet, as he stood there in the quiet aftermath of the emergency, Captain Graves couldn't help but feel a quiet sadness for Alex's family. They had no idea their child was in danger just hours before. They had no idea what had happened on the plane. But he knew that the boy would be all right now, and that was the one thing he could hold on to. The emergency had passed, but the lessons learned that day would stay with the crew forever. They would never forget the boy they saved, and the importance of acting without hesitation when lives were on the line. Hours passed after the emergency landing, and Flight 324 was soon ready to resume its journey. The crew had been through a lot that day, but they kept their focus, knowing they had a job to do. They had followed every procedure, and they had done everything in their power to help Alex. Still, there was one question that lingered in their minds: what had caused the boy's severe allergic reaction? Captain Graves sat in the cockpit, staring out the window. The sky was clear, and the sun was starting to set, casting a warm golden glow over the airport. He couldn't stop thinking about the incident. It was hard to believe that something so serious had happened so quickly. The emergency landing had been the right decision, but what would have happened if they hadn't acted in time? In the back of the plane, Barbara and Sarah were going over the details of the flight. They were exhausted, but their minds were still racing. They had tried to comfort Alex during those long moments of fear and pain, but they both knew there was more to the story. They still needed answers. After the ambulance had taken Alex away, the crew had given their statements to the airport authorities. They had explained everything that had happened, from the moment they noticed the boy's discomfort to the emergency landing. But now they were waiting for the hospital to provide more information about Alex's condition. The wait felt long, but it wasn't until the next day that they received the news they had been hoping for. Captain Graves was sitting in the crew lounge when he received a phone call. It was from the hospital where Alex had been taken. The voice on the other end was calm and professional. "Hello, Captain Graves. This is Dr. Harris from the hospital. I wanted to give you an update on the boy from your flight." Captain Graves sat up straight, his heart skipping a beat. "Is he okay?" Dr. Harris paused for a moment before answering. "Yes, he's stable now, and his condition has improved significantly. We were able to treat him in time, and he's recovering well." A sense of relief washed over Graves. "That's great news, but what exactly happened to him?" "Well, after running some tests, we discovered that the boy had a rare and severe allergic reaction to a medication he had taken before the flight," Dr. Harris explained. "It wasn't food-related, as we originally thought. It turns out that the medication triggered an unusual response in his body, causing the swelling and other symptoms you observed." Captain Graves was surprised. "A medication? We had no idea. Is he going to be all right?" "He will be fine, but we've advised his family to be careful with that particular medication in the future. It's an allergy that can sometimes be triggered by certain factors, like stress or altitude. But thankfully, you acted quickly, and that made all the difference in his recovery." Captain Graves let out a breath he didn't realize he had been holding. "Thank you for the update, Doctor. I'm so glad to hear he's going to be okay." After hanging up, Captain Graves felt a deep sense of relief. It had been a stressful and uncertain time, but now they knew the truth. Alex's condition wasn't caused by food or a typical allergy. It had been triggered by something much more unexpected, and the quick thinking of the flight crew had saved his life. In the cabin, Barbara and Sarah had also received the news. They were both sitting in their seats, their faces showing the exhaustion that came with the day's events. But when they heard the news about Alex's recovery, a smile spread across their faces. Barbara nodded, her heart finally settling. "Me too. We did the right thing. We acted quickly, and now he's going to be fine." The two of them shared a quiet moment, reflecting on the events that had unfolded. They had faced a true emergency, but together they had kept their composure and made the right decisions. It wasn't always easy, but it was moments like this that reminded them why they loved their jobs. They had saved a life, and that was something they would never forget. As Flight 324 prepared for its final leg of the journey, Captain Graves walked back into the cabin to speak with Barbara and Sarah. He looked at them both with a sense of pride. "Great job, everyone. We made it through." Barbara and Sarah smiled back at him, feeling the weight of the day slowly lifting. "We did it together," Sarah said, her voice warm. The plane took off once again, heading toward its final destination. The crew had been through a lot, but they had come out stronger and more united than ever. They had faced the unknown, worked as a team, and ultimately saved a life. It was moments like this that made their jobs meaningful. As the plane soared into the evening sky, Captain Graves looked out the window, grateful for the calm that had finally returned. The storm had passed, and they had all made it through. The days after the emergency landing felt strangely quiet. The crew of Flight 324 had returned to their normal routines, but the memory of that day lingered in their minds. They had saved a boy's life. It wasn't something any of them would forget, and as the days went on, they began to reflect more on what had happened. For Captain Graves, the events of that day continued to play out in his mind. He had seen countless situations in his career as a pilot, but nothing like this had ever happened before. The quick decision to make an emergency landing, the coordinated efforts of the crew, and the professional medical team, they had all come together in the most unexpected way. It was a reminder of how quickly life could change, and how important it was to stay alert at all times. Barbara, who had been by Alex's side throughout the ordeal, couldn't shake the feeling of pride that filled her whenever she thought about the boy's recovery. She had always loved working as a flight attendant, but that day had given her a sense of purpose she hadn't fully understood before. It wasn't just about serving drinks and making sure passengers were comfortable. It was about being there for them in their moments of need, offering care, and sometimes even saving lives. Sarah, who had helped comfort Alex while they waited for medical assistance, also felt a deep connection to the boy's recovery. She had seen the fear in his eyes, but now, knowing he was safe, it brought a sense of peace to her heart. Sarah had always been a caring person, but that day had shown her just how important her role was. Every moment, every action mattered when someone's life was on the line. As the crew members went about their daily tasks, they were all still a little shaken by the experience. But they knew one thing for sure. They had made the right decisions when it mattered most. They had worked as a team, and in the end, they had saved Alex. A few weeks later, Captain Graves received a letter from Alex's family. It arrived in the mail, carefully addressed to him, and it caught him by surprise. He hadn't expected anything, but as he opened the envelope, he felt his heart warm as he read the words inside. "Dear Captain Graves and the crew of Flight 324, we are writing to thank you for everything you did to save our son's life. When we heard about the emergency landing, we were terrified. We didn't know what had happened or how Alex was doing. But when we arrived at the hospital, we were relieved to learn that he had been taken care of by the best team of people we could have ever hoped for. It was your quick thinking, your care, and your professionalism that made the difference. Without you, we might have lost him. We will be forever grateful to you all for what you did. Thank you from the bottom of our hearts. Sincerely, the Harris family." Captain Graves felt a lump in his throat as he finished reading the letter. He had known that their actions had saved Alex, but reading these heartfelt words made it all real. It wasn't just about doing their jobs. It was about making a difference in someone's life, and that was something no amount of training or experience could fully prepare you for. He looked up from the letter and glanced out of his office window. The sun was setting, casting a soft, golden light over the runway. He felt a sense of fulfillment, a quiet satisfaction that had been missing for a long time. Being a pilot was about more than flying planes. It was about the lives you touched along the way, and the responsibility that came with it. Barbara and Sarah also received letters from the Harris family. They read the words with the same sense of pride and gratitude. It felt good to know that their efforts had meant so much to Alex's family. But more than that, it felt good to know they had made a difference. As the weeks passed, the crew returned to their regular flights. The memory of Alex and the emergency landing would always stay with them, but it had become a reminder of their purpose. They were more than just a team of flight attendants, pilots, and medical staff. They were a team of heroes, each playing a small part in making the world a little safer, a little kinder. The next time they boarded a flight, they would know that no matter what happened, they would be ready. Ready to face whatever challenges came their way, and ready to make a difference in someone's life. And for Alex, it was a new chapter in his life, a second chance at life. His family was forever grateful, and they never forgot the crew of Flight 324. The boy, once a scared child on a plane, was now healthy and strong, and his family knew that they had been given the greatest gift of all, the gift of time. Months passed, but the story of Flight 324 stayed with the crew. Each of them had been forever changed by the events of that day. It wasn't just about the emergency landing or the quick response. It was about the bond they had formed in a moment of crisis and the lesson they had learned about the importance of being ready for anything. Captain Graves, who had been flying for over 20 years, was more aware than ever of how unpredictable life could be. He had seen calm flights turn into emergencies, and emergencies that seemed like they might end badly turn into successful resolutions. But nothing had prepared him for what had happened with Alex, that moment when he made the call to land the plane. It was a decision that had saved the boy's life. Every day after, he thought about how quickly things could change, and how it was their responsibility to be prepared for the unexpected. Barbara, too, had been affected. She had always known that flight attendants played an important role in the safety of the passengers, but now she saw it in a whole new light. She'd never thought much about how her actions could truly make a difference, but after what happened with Alex, she understood. She had been part of the team that saved a life. She was a part of something bigger than just the flight, and that knowledge gave her a new sense of purpose. Sarah, who had stayed close to Alex during the crisis, had also been thinking a lot. She had always been someone who cared deeply for others, but after the emergency, she realized the power of compassion. The simple act of sitting by someone's side in their most vulnerable moment could help calm fears and make a person feel safe. It wasn't just about medical expertise or flight skills. It was about showing up for people when they needed you the most. But life went on, and the crew had to continue their work. Every flight they boarded reminded them of what had happened, but it also gave them a sense of pride. They had all worked together in the face of an emergency, and they had saved a life. They knew they had made the right choices, and that feeling of accomplishment carried them forward in their careers. One afternoon, while Captain Graves was sitting in the cockpit, waiting for his flight to begin, he received an unexpected phone call. It was from the Harris family. He hadn't heard from them since the incident, but he remembered them fondly, especially Alex, whose face still came to mind whenever he thought of the emergency. Captain Graves. The voice on the other end was familiar, and Graves immediately recognized it. "Mrs. Harris, how are you?" "We're doing well. Thank you for asking. But I'm calling today for a special reason. We've been talking a lot as a family, and we decided that we want to do something to honor the crew of Flight 324. Captain Graves felt his heart lift at the mention of the family's gratitude. "That's very kind of you, but there's no need to do anything like that. We were just doing our jobs." "I understand, Captain," Mrs. Harris replied. "But it's more than that. You and your crew saved my son's life, and we want to show our appreciation. We've decided to create a scholarship in Alex's name, a scholarship that will go toward training flight crews, pilots, and flight attendants who are dedicated to making a difference in the lives of passengers. We believe it's important to honor those who take their responsibilities seriously, just like you and your crew did that day." Graves felt a lump form in his throat. He hadn't expected this, but the idea touched him deeply. He had never thought about what kind of lasting impact his actions might have. "That's an incredible gesture, Mrs. Harris. I'm truly honored. I know the crew would be just as grateful as I am." Captain Graves was silent for a moment, overwhelmed by the kindness of the gesture. "Thank you," he said finally, his voice filled with emotion. "This is more than we could ever ask for." After the phone call ended, Graves sat quietly in the cockpit, reflecting on everything that had happened. He had never imagined that his actions would lead to something so meaningful. It wasn't just about saving a life. It was about the ripple effect that kindness and quick thinking could have on the world. He knew that the scholarship would help future flight crews better understand the importance of acting quickly, caring for passengers, and always being prepared. But even more than that, it would serve as a reminder to everyone that even in the most difficult moments, there was always the potential to make a difference. As the flight took off, and the airplane soared into the sky, Captain Graves felt a sense of peace settle over him. The journey of Flight 324 had led him to a place he hadn't expected, but it had brought with it a new sense of purpose. He knew that his crew would carry the lessons they'd learned with them, and that they would always be ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. Months passed, and life continued for the crew of Flight 324. They were back to flying regular routes, but the memory of the emergency landing and the kind gesture from Alex's family remained in their hearts. The scholarship in Alex's name had been established, and every year it helped train future flight crews. It had become a symbol of hope, care, and the importance of being ready for anything. Captain Graves, Barbara, and Sarah all kept in touch with each other. They often met for coffee when they were off duty, talking about their lives and their work. They had become more than just colleagues. They had become friends, united by the bond of having saved a life together. Their conversations often drifted to the scholarship and how it was making a difference in the lives of young pilots and flight attendants. One day, a letter arrived for Captain Graves. It was from the organization that handled the Alex Harris Scholarship. The letter was short but full of gratitude. Dear Captain Graves, on behalf of the Scholarship Committee, we would like to inform you that we are awarding a special recognition to you and your crew for your bravery, quick thinking, and unwavering commitment to passenger safety. Your actions on that fateful day not only saved a life, but also inspired an entire generation of flight crews to embrace their roles with dedication and compassion. We hope this recognition will serve as a reminder of the lasting impact that one moment of courage can have. Sincerely, the Alex Harris Scholarship Committee. Captain Graves read the letter over and over, a smile slowly spreading across his face. He had never thought that something as simple as making an emergency landing would lead to such an incredible outcome. It wasn't about fame or awards. It was about saving Alex's life, but knowing that it had made a difference to others was deeply moving. He shared the letter with Barbara and Sarah, and together they reflected on everything they had been through. The scholarship had become a symbol of the values they held dear: readiness, kindness, and a commitment to the safety of others. And it had gone beyond that. By funding the training of new flight crews, the legacy of that day was now carried forward. Every time a new flight crew passed their training, they were reminded of the importance of quick thinking and compassion, just like the crew of Flight 324 had shown. The recognition from the Scholarship Committee was presented at a ceremony that the entire crew attended. It was a moment to honor their actions, but more importantly, it was a chance to remember why they did what they did, to care for others. Captain Graves gave a short speech at the ceremony, thanking his crew and everyone who had been part of the experience. He spoke about the importance of always being prepared, of trusting each other, and of making a difference when it mattered most. We don't often think about the impact we have on others, Captain Graves said into the microphone. But sometimes it only takes one moment to change everything. I am proud to be part of a crew that acted with courage and care, and I am honored that this scholarship will help future generations of flight crews who will continue to make a difference in people's lives. As the ceremony came to a close, the crew stood together, surrounded by family, friends, and fellow pilots and attendants. They had become a symbol of what it meant to be ready, to act selflessly, and to care for those around them. And now, the legacy of their actions would live on through the scholarship, inspiring others to follow in their footsteps. In the years that followed, Alex, now a young man, went on to do amazing things. He never forgot the flight crew who had saved his life. He knew that their actions had given him the chance to live a full, happy life, and he was determined to honor their memory. Eventually, Alex became involved with the scholarship himself, working alongside the committee to ensure that the next generation of flight crews understood the true meaning of their work. As for Captain Graves, Barbara, and Sarah, they continued to fly, always remembering that one day that had changed everything. They knew that what they had done wasn't just about their actions in that moment. It was about the future and the lives they had touched. The story of Flight 324 had ended, but the legacy it created would live on for generations to come, reminding everyone that courage, kindness, and quick thinking can make all the difference.